thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And please don't laugh. I'm going to attempt to play the drum. Well, thank you. You're being very kind. As you can see, I am not a professional drummer, not by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm an author, I'm a writer who learned a little bit about drumming to write my novel. I knew that I wanted to have drumming in my novel. I knew I wanted to have a drummer from Senegal as a main character, and I also wanted to have individuals in my novel who are on the receiving end of some drumming lessons. And so I was writing these characters and I was thinking to myself, well, I should probably take some lessons. And what I found out is that there is a huge drumming world in Massachusetts. I'm sure it's all over the country, but I had no idea that there were all these drumming circles all over the place, and they drum at the Hatch Shell, they drum for 4th of July, they drum for all these different things. And so I went to the Drum Connection Arlington, and I took classes, and once you start taking classes, you get sucked into this world. And when I was taking these classes, one, I was telling the owner, I said, I'm just taking this to learn how to drum. And then one of the students came up and said, oh, you should take this clinic, this master drummer from West Africa is coming here. You should take his class. And so I ended up in this big auditorium at, I think it was Melrose City Hall Chambers. And all these people, I would say from here to maybe over where that desk is right there, huge circle. And this very well-known, I didn't know who he was, but well-known African drummer had us play these very intricate rhythms, which I couldn't play properly. And he would demonstrate it. And then as we're all drumming, he's walking around the room. And he's looking at all of us. And he would come to me and he's like that. Everyone would stop. And he'd say, do it again. And I'm messing up, and I'm messing up. And I said, I'm just a writer. I want to learn to drum a little bit. I'm not serious like this. There were people in that room next to me who were saying, well, people who aren't serious, they should stay home. And I was like, they can tell I'm not serious. They were just really like zealots about this drumming. So I learned a lot of different interesting things from doing the drumming. And so I learned about the rhythm I played is called fanga. It's the welcoming rhythm in West African villages. So if you want to let people know that you see people coming along the road, oh, you're welcome to come here, you play the fanga rhythm. And you have dancers, they're not dancers, but they're people who are there who break out into dance. They dance along with it. And if you want to explore, oh, who are those people over in that village? Well, you're walking and you're drumming fanga to say, I come in peace, and we just want to say hello and see who you are, and so you're playing fanga. I also learned about the djembe, this goblet-shaped drum. My understanding, it is tuned traditionally by tightening these ropes here. The head is made out of goat skin, typically. An animal's skin is stretched on it. It's hollow, and you might be able to see these carvings here, which are very nice. And what I read was that traditionally there are no carvings, but U.S. audiences like things that are kind of ornate. So for our audience, the American people, they carve the bottom. In the 1950s, when my character Omar, the real life African drummers, the 50s came over from West Africa, they had a hard time getting people to really embrace the drumming. And in some cases, many African Americans felt it was just tribal music, and it was just not polished, and they didn't care for it. So it took a while to push through and to get people interested. And there's a drummer from the 1950s who I used his story for my character. He came over on a Rotary scholarship, and he got a contract with RCA, and he was a big-time drummer. And it's interesting because a few years ago, when I was working on my novel, I was telling my mother about that drummer, the real-life drummer, and she and my dad in the 60s had gone to New York City to see that man play. And I said, I can't believe this. And I said, well, he passed away in the 90s. And my mother was like, oh, that's too bad. Because they were, back then, before the Beatles came to the U.S., concerts were very intimate, and they were in a small club, and you're right near the stage, and they watched him do his thing and play. And they actually had some of his albums in our house. So, what a coincidence. So, with this djembe, by tradition, it is the men who play it. Women don't play it, but it's beginning to change. Women are beginning to play it. Back, let's say, the olden days, maybe the 1500s or before that, the blacksmiths would go out in the forest to find the tree that they thought was right for that particular drummer who had ordered a djembe. And they would pray to the gods of the tree for permission to chop it down to create the drum. And then they would carve this drum and make it fit the size of that particular drummer. So I'm going to read a small excerpt of how I was, doing my research on the djembe, and then how I made my character Omar, or tried to make him come to life. So in this scene, Della and Sydney, their neighbors, they're at a restaurant, Uncle Mustafa's restaurant, for anyone who's read the book, and all of a sudden, this very handsome, well-built drummer comes in with his drums, and he greets his niece and nephew and swings them up, and as he swings them up, and the main character see how, his flexing muscles and all this, he's on stage, and here's what happens. Della and Sydney. They watched as Omar tied the djembe around his waist using a thick cloth belt. He closed his eyes and began striking the face of the drum, alternating with his palms, fingers, and fingertips. Diners turned in their seats to watch him and began bopping their heads in time with the beat. He produced sounds that were high-pitched and sharp, as well as low, deep, round, and full. Then he leveled off, patting softly and producing a sound low enough that diners could talk without shouting. Kofi and Anamara played along on the rattler and the bell. Sydney went to the stage with her camera. Without missing a beat, the drummer gave her a nod and a smile. A rapid drum beat turned everyone's attention to the bandstand. That drummer is talented, Sydney said. So when I was taking the lessons, first at Boston Center for Adult Education, the instructor there, I would not only try to learn how to drum, but I would watch him. And it would seem like he was mesmerized. He would be drumming, and all of a sudden his eyes are like this, and his tongue is kind of hanging out, and he's like he's, like he's hypnotized. And that's why I try to depict that in my story, where you get into a rhythm with it, these professional drummers, and they're in the zone. They're in their own world. So I tried depicting that. Let me see here. So my central characters are Malachi and Sydney. Malachi is a professor at Whittington University, something like Amherst University, let's say. I mean, not Amherst, but let's say UMass Amherst, out west, western Massachusetts. And he has gone for tenure, has been denied, and he believes it's racism. He's a newlywed. He married Sydney, who's in law school. They met at the university. But he's fed up, and he wants to make a change. He's something of a black militant from the early 70s. Not long after, John F. Kennedy, Dr. King, Malcolm X, when the civil rights movement was really getting underway there in the late 60s and 70s, 60s and early 70s, and he wants to open up what would be called a protest bookstore, where you come in, you can recite poetry, have these great conversations about what to do about the power system and police brutality, and also you're there to learn. So he wants to make it into like an academy for learning, but you're also a business. And so he thinks that he's going to benefit from this because there's going to be this urban redevelopment project that happens to be in Omar's neighborhood. He's an immigrant, Omar is. If their bookstore is here and they're going to tear down this neighborhood for the Civic Center, then he thinks they'll do well. Now, Sydney's mother says, well, you know, your new husband is a professor. What does he know about running a business? And I'll read a short excerpt from that section. So this is Malachi who's talking now. He says to his wife, Sydney, I want to call it the Talking Drum Bookstore and Cultural Center. She leaned back, resting her head on his chest, and smiled. The name has a melodious feel. I wouldn't think of vetoing it. I love it. Every time people see the name, they'll think of our African ancestors pounding on the drums to celebrate births, marriages, a call to war. Our talking drum is going to break it down for people, teach them about politics, economics, and the Black arts movement. Then after we've been around for a while, I like to move into the next phase. We'll expand on the cultural aspect. It will be a research center with collections from famous Black poets, writers, philosophers, and artists. Scholars will come from all over the world to do research. We'll be quoted in research papers. Who needs Whittington University? I'll start my own academy. Malachi sounded like he was lecturing a room full of college students, but she remembered reading somewhere that most businesses failed within the first year. What had her mother said before the wedding? He's an academic. What does he know about retail? And you think it'll make money? She asked. He massaged her shoulders. I wouldn't have bought the building if I didn't think it would. We'll corner the market. Where else in the area are Black people going to find books written by Black people about Black issues? Where else can Black people meet to discuss what's going on? He shifted around to face her. You're not having second thoughts, are you? She rarely saw Malachi look so serious. The last time was when his application for a full professor's position was denied. She squeezed his hand. No, we're offering something that's hard to find in this area. The neighborhood's not that bad, and the house is lovely. I don't see why we wouldn't get a lot of customers. She pushed her mother's words to the back of her mind. This was Malachi's dream. She would give him her full support. So she decides to leave law school and to support him. So whenever I've done presentations, people have asked me what inspired my characters. And give me the lights down. I'm going to show some slides. Or is it, maybe it's okay. Oh yeah, that's good. That's good. So keep in mind what I said about Sydney's mother didn't think that he would know how to run a business because he's an academic. So when people ask me, well, what inspired your characters? I didn't mean for this to happen. I really didn't mean for this to happen, but it did happen. My characters were inspired by Mom and Dad. Without me realizing it, they crept into my story. My parents were born in Virginia. They grew up during the 1940s and 50s in the Shenandoah Valley area under segregation, under Jim Crow. So growing up, I learned about Jim Crow when I was in high school, I think, in high school. So I didn't know what it was. I didn't know that what I learned in high school when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, and my parents would get my sister and me in the car to go from Connecticut, where I was born and raised, to homecoming in Virginia. And the further we would get down the road, the more south we were going, all these stories would come out from the front seat, Mom and Dad reminiscing about what they went through, about growing up and having to step off a sidewalk. If a white person was coming this way, you just step off and you could not look them in the eye. You look down, you step off into the road. You can't go to a restaurant. You have to go to the back door to be served. You have to take it to go. In a store, you want to purchase something? Well, you got to wait till all the white people get their sales rung up first. You've got to wait. The bus. My mother told me this story about how when she was very young, she and her mother had to go to the back of the bus, but if all the seats were taken by black people, you just stand. You couldn't, if there's a seat right there, but it's the white section, you can't take that seat. And my mother she said to my grandmother, "There's a seat, why can't we sit there?" And my grandmother says, "Hush up, girl." Because at that age, she wouldn't understand. So it just seems like every time we would go down on the way to Virginia, I would say to the Jersey Pike, all these stories are coming out, about all the stuff they went through. And my parents they grew up poor. They they couldn't go past high school. They didn't have connections like some people had. And they knew they stayed there, they'd be doing housework and stuff, menial work. Has anybody seen the movie, The Help? Have any of you seen the movie or read the book? Interesting, this is an aside, I'll go into it anyway. My parents said that I went to see the movie with my friends. I thought it was I really enjoyed it. My parents said when they went to see the movie, they almost walked out. They couldn't take it. And I said, well, why? Because that's what they lived with. I didn't live with that. So they lived with that, and they couldn't, they really almost walked up, but they forced themselves to sit through it. They didn't deal with that, but my mother told me that her aunts would come home at the end of the week and tell stories about what you saw in the movie. The little boy that they helped to raise is all of a sudden calling them the N-word and all these horrible things. And my mother said she could have written the movie because everything that she would hear her, older relatives talking about, all they went through, it was realistic. So Mom and Dad decided that they would have a better opportunity if they came north. My father had 4 sisters who'd already come up north, and 3 were in Bridgeport, Connecticut. So after they got engaged and my father finished his Army service, he came up north to my aunt's house in Bridgeport, and he got 3 jobs within the first week. So then he came back, my parents got married, they moved north. They came back up, and so my parents were part of the Great Migration of African Americans who left the South for better opportunities. I say that because there were a lot of issues that came up. Once you get north, you see how it's not the promised land like you think it is. But they came north. Bridgeport, Connecticut, on Long Island Sound, lots of factories at that time. And my father and mother worked at General Electric. My father was a machinist. My mother she told me she worked on the assembly line assembling hair dryers for a while. And Bridgeport, it was a booming place. Frisbee Pie Company was founded there. And of course, we all know about the Frisbee, I think, the toy that was inspired by, I understand there were some college students who were taking the Frisbee pies, they're throwing them around, and someone said, I'll invent a toy and make billions of dollars. The corset factory was there, and that did very well. They made most of the corsets back in the day that women wore. Yes? 1955. That's when they when they got married. So that's an old picture. You can see that's a trolley car. That's an old picture of Bridgeport. And that's also, they produce automobiles, if you can believe that. That's a car that was produced in Bridgeport. And the mailboxes, that company was there too. And the Singer sewing machine. I understand Mr. Singer opened his big factory. It's still there. The building is there, but it's all the windows are torn up and everything else, But in fact, in later years when I was a child, I did a sewing camp at the Singer store in Bridgeport because, Singer was huge there. Take a look at that. That was Main Street. Back in the day, early 1900s. In this picture right here, look at this one closely, because this will come up again. That was, looking at those taxis and cars, I would say that would be the 1950s, the Hotel Savoy, in the heart of downtown Bridgeport. So after my father worked at the factory for about 15, 18 years, he said to my mother, that's my dad, that's my father. He passed away in September at the age of 90. So my father says to my mother, I want to fulfill my dream of opening a business. And my mother was not in favor of that. My sister and I were, small kids, and he was doing okay at the factory. He was a foreman at General Electric. She did not believe he had a head for business, but he insisted, and he took a few classes here and there, and then that's what happened. They opened with their money together Braxton's men's shop. Fine, high fashion for men. Suits, tuxedos, all that. They worked side by side until my mother finally said, you know what, if you want to have a marriage, you do this yourself, and I'll get my own job. Because it was hard, because she was more hard-nosed and he was all a softie. And she was like, you can't be a softie and run a business. My father did do was, he was able to parlay that into politics. He became the head of the NAACP in Bridgeport. He became a city council member. And this is the person you see at the bottom here. He might be a state representative still. And my father mentored him when he was a little boy, because he would walk by the store. He lived in the neighborhood, and he saw a suit that he liked in the store. And his mother, I think over time, would lay away, got it for him, and then they became friends, and they were friends. And he spoke at my father's funeral. So I learned some things about how my father mentored him that I didn't know about. That's Mom and Dad, and to date that picture, my niece and nephew, my nephew's a junior in college, and my niece is about to start college in the fall. And redevelopment happened. So in Bridgeport, the mall, that was the big department store Reed's, and the mall kept expanding, and all the shoppers left the downtown, they left Bridgeport proper, and went to Trumbull to shop. And guess what happened? That's the same hotel. That's how it looks now. Because there's really nothing going on downtown. And the current mayor, and the mayors before him also, wanted to redevelop. So there are houses on a street called Seaview Avenue, right near my parents' store. And they took down all the, the 2 and 3 family houses that were there, just took all those, and there's nothing there now. The people were displaced. It's been about 20 years, and there's still nothing there. But for part of it, they've done this. They've built a marina. They have a Bass Pro Shop now. There's a Starbucks. They have an oyster bar. They have condos where, I would say New Yorkers have a lot of money, will come and do some things. They have an arena. They have a couple of arenas now there, too. But the people who lived there, it was a really great place where people who were just starting out, like the Great Migration people in the 50s and 60s, moved in, did well, worked at the factories, and the factories left too. They went overseas, and they would do well and move on. But now that's pretty much gone. Adding insult to injury, there's the current mayor. That headline was a news story about they handed my parents a check, and they demolished the store building, and my parents owned a 2-family house behind it, as well as a grocery shop next to it. My father is so identified with Braxton's, and I mentioned how he segued so much. He couldn't deal with not being Mr. Braxton. And if anyone has read about Uncle Mustafa in the book, the outcome was different, obviously, but my father's so identified with that. And what I wanted to capture in the Talking Drum was how oftentimes you read the paper about this neighborhood's being redeveloped and they're going to plow this over, but you don't hear the stories about the people, the real stories about how that affects them. Some people they can't cope with it. They can't cope with losing the fabric of their neighborhood, losing their friends who are right there. They can't transition and move on. I'm not saying that gentrification is bad. I'm saying that there needs to be more of an investment of the people. Invest in them too when you're making these changes. So for a lot of people, it's really tough. And I really wanted to depict that, the human story of what happens when you lose your neighborhood. And Mr. Gannum He was there at, this the mayor, he was there at my dad's funeral. And I got on his case. I said, well, yes, but we invited you to his birthday party last year. You didn't show up. And he apologized for that, because that's when my father was in pretty good shape. So that's that. They inspired it. Because as I was writing, I'm thinking to my mother was reading part of it, and she said, how did you know, Lisa, that I applied to law school and took a few classes, but then your father wanted to open the store? And I stopped. I said, well, I didn't realize that. What a coincidence. But my life crept into it. So that's pretty much my presentation, and I will answer any questions if there are any questions. Oh. I was so young at that time, I have no idea. I don't know. I know that my father retired. He worked at General Electric, and he opened the store at the same time for a while, but then he was just like, he'd be in the store in the back taking a nap, and people were coming in. So he had to, he retired, he got a pension until he passed away. And union, I don't know. I would think he would have. Yeah, he never mentioned. He mentioned in recent years he would say how he got tired of being laid off, because I guess with their manufacturing defense machinery and things, and if the government didn't need anything at that point, they would lay you off, bring you back when they needed more supplies. He mentioned that. Yes. Yeah, mostly black and Latinx, I would say. When my parents moved there, it was almost all black. One thing I didn't say was how they moved up because of better conditions up north, but my mother said they found that there were only a few apartment buildings they could move into. They were only for people who are Latina, and black. So they couldn't just go anywhere. There were only certain buildings where they could actually rent an apartment. And my mother said that she would, on the phone back then when we had newspapers and we had the classifieds, and she would look for a secretarial job, and she would be told, oh, there's an opening here. And she'd go there in person, and they'd look at her and say, there are no openings here. And that happened several times. That kind of thing happened. So it's all very interesting how I'm sure it was better in many ways, but you're hoping for this promised land, but there are always complications, no matter where you go.
So when did that loosen up? They moved out of that apartment and things changed somewhere?
Yes, somewhat. My mother, when my mother was 6 months pregnant with me, their landlord who lived downstairs said, I don't want any children making noise on the floor, so they had to move. And they moved to, they bought a house, and then one of the neighbors, and they were the first black family in the block, which they found out because one of the neighbors who befriended us said that when it was discovered that my parents were moving into that house, a man on that street went to all the other families and let them know black people are moving into that house there. So I would say, yeah, it loosened up, but you see what I mean? It loosens up, but there are always going to be issues, and not always, but. In, 1961, that's telling my age, 1961. Yeah. My father found the house. My mother, this is like a 1950s marriage, and she didn't care for it was a busy street. But my father found the house, he put in the down payment because he's the man, and that's where they moved. Yes, they did. My mother passed away in 2020. And my father, at that point, he had dementia. And we got him to move out into a nice assisted living place. So, yes, my parents moved in 1961, and they stayed until they passed away, which meant my sister and I and our husbands and my niece and nephew, who you saw there when they were little, we had to rent 3 dumpsters On 3 different occasions. Dumpster 1, oh, there's more. Dumpster 2, oh, there's more. Dumpster 3, there are 4 Christmas trees up in the attic. 4 Christmas trees. And we had a sale on Facebook Marketplace. I did an auction. And then we had 1-800. It wasn't like they were hoarding. They just had a lot of stuff. And my father was the type, he would just, like with my sister when we were kids, if the room was a mess, my sister's room, he would say, okay, I'm taking all your toys and I'm going to put them in a box in the basement. So so things that were left over in the attic, up in the crawl space, before you know it, it's like, wait a minute, there's all this stuff up there. So, yeah, it was interesting. There was a lot to do.
And did the neighborhood change? Did that neighborhood change?
It did, because the man who owned the houses, I guess the land behind our house, died at some point, and then people of color moved in, because he vowed he would not sell to anybody black. And so it was all white until he died, and then other people of other ethnicities moved in. So now it's racially mixed now. Yes?
Was there any story that inspired the couple that moved in that rented the apartment from Sydney and Malachi and moved in downstairs? Did that come from anywhere, or was that just a...
No, that was my imagination. I wanted Sydney to finally stand up for herself and find her voice. So that was her last straw when Malachi did not listen to her when she said, let's check out these prospective tenants that are going to rent the basement. And he said, oh, Kwame, I trust him, they'll be fine. And things blew up, in their face, basically. So she finally found her voice. They had their tiff that lasted for a few weeks or months in their separate bedrooms, but that's how she was able to push herself to be more assertive. So that was a vehicle, and also kind of comic relief at the same time. And I like dumbwaiters for some reason. I love dumbwaiters. I don't know why, but I find them fascinating. So that's what happened. That's where all that happened from. I'm sorry, I can't hear. Della. Also my imagination, just my imagination. But I will say that the body type of some of my characters, like the lady in the basement with her husband, one of my friends in my book club, I patterned her look after her. Interestingly enough, my book club read the book, but that person didn't recognize herself. So I was kind of nervous about that, but she didn't see that as her. So some of the way people looked is based on people I knew or I know, but Della was just an invention, total invention of mine.
Could you talk a little bit about your process of reading the book from an idea to publication?
Yeah, when I was a child, I wanted to write a book, and my mother said, I was like 7 or 8, sitting in my room reading, Black Beauty and Little Women and Charlotte's Web and all those things, and Nancy Drew, and she says, Lisa, it's summer, it's nice out, why don't you go out and play? Go in the yard and play. No, Mommy, I want to read, and I want to be an author when I grow up. And she said, well, that's wonderful, Lisa, but you can't earn a living writing books. So that bothered me. That was weighing on my mind as a 6-year-old sitting there reading my books, so I can't earn a living? Oh, gee. So I said, as I got older, I said, well, I think I'll go into journalism to earn money and learn how to write and deal with deadlines and your editors and all those things. And when I was in journalism, I was so busy and it was so intense, I didn't have time to write for creatively. So then I went to grad school for creative writing. And as to get your degree, you have to produce a novel. So that forced me to sit there. They said, you have to sit in the chair 40 hours a week to write a novel. And you have to turn it in a certain 40 pages a week to finish this novel, and your mentor, your professor, will work with you, and at the end of it, if you don't have your novel done, then, you don't graduate. So, and they said, you have to give up something. If you like to have a whole full life of all these different things. So I gave up television, and I sat there, and I worked on it, and my mother read it along, and gave me some suggestions here and there, and after only 10 years, I got it published. And I was sending it out to agents. And my professor said, take their feedback. If you agree with it, revise as you go. So I would revise. I'd never did get an agent, and I went to a conference in which, in addition to educational sessions for writers, they also had the book expo of all these small presses represented at booths. And I went around to each one, and I told them about my novel, and I passed by one. It was a Canadian press, and they were way in the back, on the back wall. And I just said, well, a Canadian publisher wouldn't be interested in my book. They're Canadian, right? The next day, after having no one really interested, or people saying, oh, yeah, oh, send it to me, I'll take a look, and you knew they didn't mean it. I stopped at that Canadian press table, and I talked to her, and I told her, I gave my elevator speech, and she said, that sounds interesting. Why don't you send me a copy of it? And I said, well, can I just email it to you? No, I need the whole 364 pages. Went back home, and at work, I went down to the copy center, and don't tell anybody. I had the copy guys make me a free copy of my manuscript. Went to the post office, did all the foreign postage, whatever you have to do, the form. And then my husband and I went to Montreal on vacation, so I didn't have phone service up there. And on the way back from the Jazz Festival in Montreal, turned my phone on, and there's a message from her saying, I had my board of directors vote on it. They loved your novel. If it's still available, we'd love to give you a contract. And I'm thinking, well, yes, it's very much available. And I kept reading, I was on my phone, I kept reading it over to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. After 10 years of getting rejections, and thank goodness my husband was driving, so I could just be, I can't believe it. And then the publisher, a small press, a women's press in Toronto, published it. But then they said, oh, we don't, our funding is running out, so we have to delay your book by another year. It was, let's say it was 2017, and they said, oh, fall of 2019 it'll come out. I'm thinking, I gotta wait all that time. And then they said, oh, we have budgeting problems. It'll be out in 2020. So it came out in 2020. And I was just really thrilled, obviously. And so when I knew the day when the box of my book was going to come, and I was in a condo at that, we were in a condo building, and so when it came in, I had this little hand cart, and I ran down with my hand cart to the first floor lobby, and I rolled it into our unit, ripped open the box. Ow. I was just so happy. Held it up, had my husband take my picture with the book. I was just like, yes, it's finally here. But on Twitter with it, it was just like oh, and the beautiful thing was that my mother's health was failing in 2019. She was diagnosed with cancer. And so I've been up and down the road to Connecticut to see about her. And then on Mother's Day, 2020, with COVID, I didn't want to go into the house. So we drove down. I had my aunt was her caretaker. My aunt, I said, well, can you be there at this time? We're going to drive down. So we drove down, and my mother's, she's got the mask on, and all her hair had all come out because of the cancer treatments. And she had she had a scarf on. Oh, come on in, Lisa. No, I don't want to. If I'm a carrier, I don't want you to get sick. So I stood there at the door, and the glass door, and I went to this page here. It says "For my parents," like this, and I smashed it to the door. I was just so happy I could do that. And then my father, he was on his cane. He came down the stairs. He had this big smile on his face, and I showed it to him too at the door, and he was so happy. They were so proud of me, and I was just so happy that I could go back to when I said to my mother as a child, when I grow up, I want to be a novelist, and I finally got it done before they passed away. And I was just so happy that I was able to do that. And then when my father was in the assisted living, we would, my sister and I would get on Zoom with him sometimes, and he did say that he read to page 36. And I said, for someone who has dementia and keeps saying to me, when can I get out of here and go back to the store and sell some suits? That's pretty impressive. I think that one of the people at the staff read that to him, but that he read to page 36. I was like, thank you, Daddy. And he was just. And we had a lot of things in his room for him to remember us, but I had a book on display for him in the room.
Did you talk to them about that it was them as the characters in the book?
No, because by the time my father, he wouldn't have, because we didn't realize that he had dementia. You know, when a person's all of a sudden they're like little odd, like drip, drip, drip behaviors, and you're like, why did he park the car on the sidewalk? That makes no sense. But you know, but by that time, I don't think that he would have really connected with that well. But he was very proud of me, proud that I'd written the book, and you know, it was just it made me feel very good that I finally done this, and they lived to see it. Yes.
I was just wondering, like, it took you 10 years to get the book published. Why did you consider self-publishing?
I didn't want to self-publish because people, in general, readers tend to value books more if they're published through a publisher, that they feel that they're more rigorously edited, and I didn't want to go that route. I felt maybe it's just me and my, I don't know, the way I felt about, I had a master's degree in journalism and from Southern New Hampshire in creative writing, and I felt like I wanted it to be published. I know how I am. I read some self-published, but I like reading books that are published by a publisher. And I said, I am not going to rest until I get this book published. Because when I was getting rejected toward the end of that time, before I got Anana they were interested, I said, if I have to tear the manuscript up and start over and do it over with different characters and everything else, I will do that. I will not rest till I get this. I was determined. Nothing was going to stop me from getting this published by a real publisher. Nothing was going to stop me. So that's just, I can be that way, like kind of relentless about some things. It's just, I don't like, I like winning. I don't like even playing Scrabble with my nephew. I told my nephew, when he was a baby, had him on my lap, on my mother's desktop, taught him to play Scrabble. At the age of 16, we played again. We played all throughout the years, but at the age of 16, I beat him by 1 point. And I said, you know what, we're done. Because if I play you again, I can't be the champion. I have to stay the champion. And the only way to stay the champion is if I don't play you again. We've never played since. That's me. That's me. I'm working out another novel, but because of the upheaval with my parents, I had to put it aside. But I am working on a collection of grieving stories about, grieving my parents, that process. I'm hoping by next year to have enough to shop around to a publisher. So I am working on another novel, but it's kind of on the back burner right now. Yes?
Did your experience as a journalist help you, or what did you get from that?
It helped me to understand deadlines, that if my professors had a deadline, you need to hand in this number of pages by this date, I could do that. Also that not to take criticism personally and just give up, because with the newspaper reporting, and TV too, but newspapers, you just hand a story in and they will sit down with you and say, you've got to do all these different things or fix this. You have to be thick-skinned. And those things help me. I know some people who have self-published because they said, I've written this book and I don't want to make any changes to it. And they really did need to make some changes, but they wouldn't do it because they didn't want anybody to touch a word. So if you have a good editor, they'll make your story better. And my editor did. She made my story, she helped enhance it.
Besides giving talks, what else do you do to market the book?
Okay, well, when I first got the book, when it was about to be published, I hired a publicist, and she was able to get me stories in Ms. Magazine and where else? My hometown newspaper. It was during COVID, so I did a 30-city blog tour. So I was on a blog online, 37 book bloggers, a book influencer, did some things on Instagram live with me, those things. Besides that, I was a debutante. There's a little group called the Debutante Ball blog of debut novelists, and I was chosen as a nationwide search. I was one of 5 authors chosen to be a debutante, and we had a blog, and we would blog every week about different things, about our books and other things. And I met up with some of them. They're in different parts of the country, and they've all done very well. and they're with the top publishers, and if their publishers sent them through Boston, we'd meet up. I would do some social media with them, and I've done a lot of podcasts. I've taken out ads in Poets and Writers magazine, trade magazine, a lot of different things like that.
Was the neighborhood of Petite Africa inspired by anything specific, or?
There's where is it in New York? I think it's called Little Senegal in New York. I use that as my reference point to invent Petite Africa. Well, I guess if that's it, I'd like to thank you all for spending your Thursday evening with me. And if you'd like to buy a copy of the book, they're here. They're $20. Otherwise, just thank you for your support.